I'm going to start with you, Congresswoman Stacey Plaskett, because I think one thing that a lot of people are frustrated by is, why does it have to be bipartisan? Like, why do we care how many Republicans are on this committee? Because the people who follow the Republican Party are MAGA sycophants, and there is no convincing these people of logic. So doesn't it make sense to just proceed with what they have? They have a quorum, and get the people's business done. What's your take?
Well, first, good morning to you and good morning to my colleague, Joaquin. It's so good to be with you both this morning. I think that we, as you recall, we tried to create this into a bipartisan independent commission from the beginning. And I think what the Speaker has chosen to do by naming an individual who was in fact a Republican, who is a Republican, one of the most conservative Republicans, Liz Cheney, and also while rejecting two, agreeing to the three before Kevin McCarthy drew them away, is that we recognize that this is an issue that not only Democrats care about, but Republicans as well, Republicans throughout this country, the American people. And we want to be fair about that. And we want a commission, we want a select committee and a report that I believe that most Americans will agree to. And by having individuals from both parties, we can give some comfort to those individuals who are Republicans that we're doing our part.
I think that's a legitimate point. I wish some of the Republicans cared about having credibility when it comes to Democrats. So I'll turn to you on this, Congressman Castro. As being a former impeachment manager, I'm curious because this committee has subpoena power. So how are you going to enforce subpoenas, especially if we're going to hear from folks like Don Jr., Ivanka, perhaps the former president himself? How are we going to ensure that they show up and testify before the American people? I know you're not on the committee, but being a former impeachment manager, I'm sure you have thoughts.
Yeah, no, and that's a great question. And it's been a challenge in the past to get people to show up when you subpoena them. But the Congress does have extraordinary subpoena power. And I would be surprised ultimately if the chairman, Benny Thompson, and the committee decide to subpoena somebody that they don't show up at all. I think part of the reason that you saw that happen during the Trump administration is because those witnesses who were being subpoenaed felt as though they would be backed up by the White House and the Trump administration, and they could buy time, and hopefully for them by then the proceeding would be done. But I think it'll be a very different story this time. And as Stacey mentioned, the Speaker has worked hard first to create an independent commission, and Republicans would have had equal subpoena power in that independent commission, and it wouldn't have included any current members of Congress, politicians who are current politicians. And they said no to that. The reason they said no to that is because Kevin McCarthy and the Republican Party are owned by Donald Trump. And they can't do anything they feel that upsets Donald Trump at this point. But that's not where the country is. The country rejected Donald Trump in the November 2020 election, and our interest is getting to the truth.
So in terms of getting to the truth, yeah, please go right ahead, Congresswoman, go right ahead.
I think what Joaquin was saying is so clear about the subpoena power. Also remember that when we have executed subpoenas against individuals during the Trump administration, while those individuals fought the subpoenas, you've seen through courts that the courts have upheld it with McCann and with others. And I think that they, in their best interest, don't want to prolong this into the next election. And so it behooves them to quickly come and testify and allow us to move on. Dragging it out is not going to help those individuals who want to obstruct this.
So to that point, because the White House records from November 3rd to January 3rd or January 20th have never been subpoenaed. So and I imagine they would reveal quite a lot. So in terms of, again, enforcing these subpoenas, making sure people show up, if the courts uphold it, again, what is the tangible consequence, right? I think that's what people want to know. What is the tangible consequence coming out of this committee, particularly if people are thumbing their nose at even showing up to testify before the committee? Congressman Castro, I'll let you answer.
Yeah, as Stacey mentioned, I don't think that's going to happen, especially as that McGahn case made its way through the court and McGahn finally testified. I suspect that these folks will actually show up and testify. You know, it could take a few weeks or some of them a few months, but they will have to testify. And I don't think that anything should be spared in getting to the truth. I don't think there should be a special courtesy for members of Congress, for example, who may have helped these folks plan out what their strategy was going to be or plan out what they were going to do in the building. We've seen public reporting about perhaps some connections between different members of Congress, the Republican Party, and the mob that day on January 6th. And so most of all, for the American people, we have to get at the truth about what happened.
Well, being a former impeachment manager and having worked on Capitol Hill, since you brought this up, who specifically in the Republican caucus do you think may have intentionally or unintentionally aided the insurrectionists on January 6th? That's to you, Castro, Congressman.
Sure. Well, I know that there was public reporting around that time about different members who may have walked folks around the night before, for example, or the day before. And so, I'll let the committee go through the work of determining whether any of that happened and the specific people who may have been involved. But what I'm concerned about as an American, most of all, is that we don't fence off anybody and say, hey, we're not really going to look into what you may have done or didn't do just because you're a member of Congress. Or just because you were part of the executive branch. I think everybody should be fair game when you're talking about what's essentially an attempted coup of the United States government.
Congresswoman, let me ask you, you're an attorney, so I think you have a unique perspective on this. Is there a chance that Congressman Kevin McCarthy could appoint himself to the committee? And if so, what would that mean if he's called to testify?
Well, once again, we've seen through Speaker Pelosi's power and the power of the gavel is that while Kevin McCarthy could appoint himself, Speaker Pelosi has the ability to reject him as a member of the committee. I think it would be uncomfortable to have him because, as we've seen through testimony of his own members, both Liz Cheney as well as other members of Congress, the conversations that he had with the president on that day are probably very material to the intentions of the president and what he knew and understood at that time. So having him as a witness, both as a witness as a member, seems pretty compromising and would not be appropriate. So, but we'll see what he decides to do, if he decides to walk away from this or he attempts to put an additional group of individuals on the committee.
Well, I'll stick with you on this because you and I have talked about the QAnon Congresswoman MTG before, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and just asking you about your personal safety, how safe you feel working on Capitol Hill. I asked Congressman Castro this. I'll ask you the same. Who specifically do you think in the Republican caucus may have intentionally or unintentionally helped aid the insurrectionists on January 6th? Specific names, if you're willing.
Well, I don't have any specific names of individuals. I think that everyone who voted against the certification of the election gave comfort to the notion that this was not a legitimate election. And that's bothersome on its own. That's well over 100 members of Congress in the House. But individuals who gave specific support, I am not willing at this time to say who those are because those are just rumors that I've heard. I will say, like Joaquin has said, that I believe that we are in a war to retain our democracy and that there should be no aid or no quarter for an enemy of that democracy in this committee.
All right, Congressman Castro, I think McCarthy, this threat that he has, that he may launch his own investigation and form his own committee. Is this just theatrics, or do you really think that he might go through something like this? And if so, what would that look like?
Yeah, that would be bizarre, and I think it's theatrics, and I don't see him doing that.
Famous last words, because there was a lot of things that we didn't think we'd see post-Trump that we've seen, I have to tell you.